Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, although Google Podcasts apparently is going away next year, which I hate because it's transitioning to YouTube Music, which is the worst platform ever and should be permanently banned. But that's not the purpose of today's discussion. Save that for another day. We're going to open with a couple of voicemails. So if you could, just remember to call 540-632-0160. Get on the podcast. More voicemails we get, the more mailbag episodes we'll do. And of course, you can follow us at our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Our direct messages are open on Twitter, so send us a DM at Duke FB Coverage. Let's go to Jason Rogers first, who called in with yet another eerily accurate score prediction regarding last week's game against the UConn Huskies, and we're going to listen to that now.
Hello, hello, hello out there in Pod City Podcast Land. Thanks for always. Just got done listening to the UConn preview podcast there being. Really enjoyed it as usual. I guess you could say it's my Thursday ritual now. So it's something I really enjoy listening to on Thursdays. And, of course, I love the other podcasts out there, too. Listened to them earlier this week. And I just want to throw my prediction out there. I'm really going to step out this time, guys. I'm going to go 42-0. We're going to pitch a shutout here. Dwayne, the campaign, is going to lead the charge as usual. And we're going to bring home that goose egg this go round. We've been flirting with it since the beginning of the season, and I think we're going to do it this time. Back to the Northwest game, I really feel like we finally put it all together, and I feel like we're going to put it all together again this week with their two linebackers being out. That's really a huge hole to fill in a defense. So I think that's really going to be exposed. And as usual, thanks, Ben. And thanks to your dad. Don't forget to go get the milk. And as always, go Duke.
Thank you, Jason, for continuing to listen. The nice plug you gave to the Section 17 guys. They have a great podcast as well. And thank you for calling in regularly. I really appreciate it. It's great stuff. You always have good comments and good things to say. And yes, I will get that milk. Now we are going to turn to another regular listener and caller, Tyler Lester, who has a couple of thoughts on the upcoming game, which we are going to discuss in more detail here soon. And we are going to listen to that now.
Hey, it's Tyler Lester. Hope everything's going well. So about the Notre Dame Duke game coming up, I'm wondering how everybody feels about it in terms of not even just win probability, because of course I think we've got a shot, but matchup wise. So people are going to say Clemson isn't as good this year, and Clemson still has far better, star rated players than we have. Talent wise, top to bottom, they were probably a better team than us, but I think they were just a far better matchup. The only thing that worries me about Notre Dame is I don't think their receivers are too much of an issue for us. I'm worried about the run game and just kind of the lines of scrimmage. Our offensive and defensive lines are pretty good, but I think this is going to be the first time where we actually find out how good they are, because Notre Dame is a whole different animal in terms of, that style of game. I think we match up better with Florida State than we would Notre Dame. But I'm curious to see if everybody else kind of shares that sentiment.
Well, Tyler, you make some good points, and I'm just going to say something that's basic as far as how we may have a chance to win this game, how Duke can pull off a win, and it's basic and it's simple. But football is a lot easier than we make it at times, and a lot easier than what we think about it. Really, if we can control the line of scrimmage, if we can win on the offensive line, if we can win on the defensive line and win the matchups there, we can get a win. We can get a W, and we can continue our climb in the polls. And look, it's going to be tough. It's not going to be an easy game, but I'm telling you, there's a chance. Now, before we get into how there's a chance, there's two things I wanted to comment about. One had to do with Florida State's rankings in the polls. They moved down in the AP poll, despite the fact that they beat Clemson. there was some chatter that was inappropriate. It wasn't fair. It was part of an ACC slight machine and an anti-ACC bias. Some of that may be true, but I will say for Florida State, although I like the team and I think that they're good and I think they're the best team in the conference, uh, the last 2 weeks they've had, FSU almost lost to BC, which is terrible, and a Clemson team that is more talented than its 2-2 record would suggest. But look, if Clemson had a better kicking game, Clemson gets a win. I don't think dropping the Knowles down is unreasonable, but I don't agree with it because they're still undefeated. And good teams do have to win at times when they aren't playing at their best. And that's what we've seen Florida State manage to do the last 2 weeks. Sometimes fortune will favor you, and it sure seems to favor Florida State right now. But a couple quick thoughts on Duke before we turn to this game that's coming up and our guest. Hey, we're 4-0, man. We beat Clemson, we beat Lafayette, we beat Northwestern, we beat UConn. These are all great wins. Duke has not given up much in the way of points. The defense looks very, very good. The offense looks good. The only real criticism you could possibly have is that the deep ball connection doesn't really seem to be there, but we are running the ball well. We're using our tight ends more. We're hitting the intermediate routes, and we're making the offense work. And we're just going out playing good, solid, old-fashioned, methodical football. We're not getting phased. We're not panicking. We're coming in with a game plan, and we're executing it. And nothing seems to throw us off yet. 4 games in the season. We'll see what happens. It's a big test coming up for us at home against Notre Dame. But, I will say, I don't think anybody really wants to play Duke right now. I think that's not something that we could always say. And it's nice to see that the Blue Devils are in the discussion in college football, that we're relevant in the college football discussion, that people seem to care about what we're doing. And we're going to have, college game day show up. That's a big deal. Excited, looking forward to it. And speaking of that game, since we have the Irish coming to town, we've got to get to know our next opponent. And there is absolutely no better way to do that than by talking to the man who introduced me to the background info I needed on Jamion Franklin when he came over and left Notre Dame and became a Blue Devil. We're going to be talking to my very good friend, diehard Notre Dame fan, Dan Sullivan. He's stopping by here to preview the Irish. He is an attorney here in Roanoke. And our daughters are actually on the same soccer team. So obviously it makes sense, way to plug the girls' soccer team, bring Dan on to talk about that. He and my wife both help coach that team. So Dan Sullivan, how are you, sir?
Go Mustangs.
I forgot that's the team name. That's right.
Yeah, go Mustangs. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you're tell us a little bit about your Notre Dame origin story. How did Dan Sullivan become a fan of the Irish?
So I'm Irish Catholic from the Midwest, and when you grow up Irish Catholic from the Midwest in the 80s and 90s, there's one team playing on NBC that you can always count on, and that team was Notre Dame. So I have no affiliation with the university. I have no background with the university. I didn't go there. I just love it.
I think there was a law for a while that if you're Irish Catholic, you had to be a Notre Dame fan.
I think there was. Yeah. They changed it though. Yeah.
Right. It had like a 20-year period. But you mentioned them being on NBC. The contracts coming up. You're a Notre Dame guy. You're a Notre Dame fan. What are your thoughts about Notre Dame joining the conference or staying independent?
Frankly, I with all the realignment that's happened, I'm much less religious about Notre Dame staying independent. Usually in the past, it was, oh, we got to stay independent. This is Notre Dame. This is what happens. But now it's like, it's happening. And there's going to be a big boy league and there's going to be a little boy league. And so I think Notre Dame needs to either join the ACC or join the Big Ten in the not too distant future. I mean, they don't need to do it now, and they're obviously sitting back, but it's going to, I think it's going to have to happen if they want to stay in the big boy league.
I'll be interested to see what TV deal the Irish get.
Yeah.
this go around and for how long it is in place for, because most of the big realignment, if you look at the TV contracts, or I shouldn't say realignment, I call it restructuring, that's going to happen right around 2030. So if you're Notre Dame, you're thinking maybe let's do a 5-year deal so we can start to see what happens with the Big Ten, with the ACC, with the SEC, and where this is going to end up. But I'm curious though. Notre Dame always has a good schedule. They have one of the best schedules in the country. Are you concerned though about losing some of those historic rivals if Notre Dame? I mean, think about it, because that's what we like as fans, right? We like seeing the
Yeah.
rivals.
Yeah.
You like talking smack to our friend Mike, who's a Stanford guy.
Yeah.
When
Oh,
you
yeah.
guys just obliterate that team every year like you've been doing. I mean, what kind of concerns do you have about maybe? And I know from a football perspective, from what I understand, that Notre Dame's kind of locked in the ACC for a while, but let's just say things change and they were to go to the Big Ten. I mean, would you be how disappointed would you be maybe to see some of those rivalries go away?
So there are different scales of that. So Navy is one that you play them every year, and no one ever enjoys watching a Navy game ever, because they're doing cut blocks, they're doing all the stuff that they do, and it's not a fun game. They're wasting time on purpose all the time. And Notre Dame has traditionally kept Navy on the schedule because of what is, I think, a little bit outdated sense of loyalty, but it still is. Navy did give Notre Dame the chance to have their students, Notre Dame during World War II, they provided a place for Notre Dame to be. And so that Notre Dame has basically said, we're going to schedule Navy out forever. That is one that I would not be in the slightest bit sad to see go by the wayside. Like, we can play them every 3 or 4 years if we want to. Don't care. Stanford, don't care. USC now is in the Big Ten, so we would play them if we went to the Big Ten. So USC, I like playing them. It's a big school, it's a big name school, and it's a fun school to play.
Okay. Now, looking at some of the other matchups, you've got Cal. You guys play them occasionally. Would you really care one way or another about Cal?
No. Cal is not even in the conversation.
You could be a Cal alum right now with those thoughts on Cal football. ACC legend Marshawn Lynch.
Exactly.
Okay, well let's turn from that just kind of general conference restructuring thoughts that we've gone through. Let's talk about Notre Dame so far this season. All right.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you guys are doing. You guys are 4-1, right?
Yep.
What is, and we'll get into the Ohio State game a little bit, because that was a good game. Unfortunately, I fell asleep watching it. I may have had too much to drink during the Duke UConn game. We're unsure. But what's the mood of the fan base right now at 5 games in, putting aside the way the Ohio State game ended?
Well, I would say the mood of the fan base is like a big hangover. It's a big hangover because everything you read, and I didn't even know this from the night of, I turned off the TV and went to bed, but woke up the next day and was like, oh, they only had 10 guys on the field. Oh, that's great. Yeah, twice out of a timeout. Oh, yeah, that's great. So I think the mood of the fan base is, it's a really good, really, really talented team. And the coaches let them down in that game. So they're capable of playing with anybody, but there are some questionable coaching decisions that have been made on the field that would make anybody question whether this, like, you and I are attorneys. And I know we're not getting into the Ohio State game too much, but if I had, like, we have malpractice insurance. And if that had happened to me, I would be on the phone with my malpractice insurance carrier the next day saying, there's a claim coming down the pike because I've failed and the coaching staff failed the players.
I did watch, to get ready for today, the interview that Marcus Freeman did. And I did appreciate him saying, look, we just messed up. And
yeah.
It's my fault.
He owned it.
And I respect that from him. You know, he didn't lie, he didn't deflect, he didn't come up with excuses. He just said, we made a mistake. That's on us. He took over for Brian Kelly, your good friend, Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
Tell us kind of a little bit from your perspective. I have a lot of people who come on who are journalists, or they work with the rival side or something like that.
Yeah.
But I know you're a big Notre Dame fan, which is why I wanted to have you on here. Tell us from your perspective as a fellow fan, like I am, kind of what your thoughts are on Marcus Freeman and how he's done since taking over for Brian Kelly.
So the big thing with Notre Dame coaches, and Ara Parsegian said this, is that you need head coaching experience to be a Notre Dame coach. And it's not because it's better or worse than any other program. It's because the spotlight is on you. And so when Ara Parsegian said that, he meant you need some head coaching experience in tough moments to be able to prepare you for what's going to happen. And Marcus Freeman was promoted from defensive coordinator. He has no head coaching experience. I love Marcus Freeman. I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to do really well, as long as this doesn't burn him out. Because there's a burnout with Notre Dame, and it's not because, again, they're better or worse than anyone else. It's just the spotlight is on you. And so that's what concerns me with him, is situations like these where you have a big moment, you had a chance to win it, you should have won it. I mean, they should have won that game, and they lost it because of a coaching error. And so that concerns me with him in terms of how is he going to take that and move forward. But I from a fan standpoint, love the guy. Couldn't be happier with him. He's a good recruiter. He's done everything right. But you have to win those big games.
Yeah, one of the things though that I'm curious about with him, he's a pretty young guy, but he seems to have a good grasp of things as far as how to relate to players, how to manage players, how to deal with this kind of age. Every generation is different. He seems to really have a good sense of that. I'm just curious though, from your perspective. I think Tommy Rees left, the offensive coordinator. Gerard Parker, who was a Duke coach, he came through Duke University. He was there for a short period of time, but we could talk more about that later. He is there now. Well, there's an interesting story behind that, but he's there now as the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame and also working with the tight ends. What are your thoughts about him and how he's doing? Because until the Ohio State game, they seem to really be humming on offense.
Well, and he did great in the Ohio State game as well. He played a great game until the last 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. And, you have first down. Audric Estime is running the ball down their throats. And then you call a screen pass, which, if that goes, I think JT Tui, I don't even know how to say his name. JT, whatever his last name is, Tuiomaloa. He should have intercepted it. But if he hadn't intercepted it and he threw it just a little bit higher over his arms, that's a touchdown. So if that happens, we're calling Jared Parker, and I think it's pronounced Jared.
Oh,
Parker.
I'm sorry. My mistake.
Yeah. So if that happens, we're calling him a genius, right? Like if Sam Hartman gets that pass over the arms of that lineman, it's a touchdown. Game over, ball game, bosses, done. But it didn't. And so we're all calling him an idiot right now. I mean, I think he's done so much better than I thought he would have done based on the way that the situation happened when they were trying to hire the guy from Colorado. They're trying to hire the guy from Utah. None of those worked out. And so they promoted from within. So Jared Parker was the tight end coach. They promoted from within. And we all thought, not a great idea. He's done a great job. And he did a great job until it didn't work out against Ohio State.
The one thing when I listened to that press conference is, if I remember it correctly, and if I'm misquoting it, I apologize, but it sounded like Freeman was saying, well, we wanted to be aggressive. We just didn't want to play to make them burn their timeouts. We wanted to play to win. And I'm sitting there thinking in my head, making them burn their timeouts and running that clock down and putting more pressure on them is playing to win.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is why a lot of people do that and it works. And
right.
So that was the thought process I didn't really understand going into it. But, again, they're young guys and they'll probably learn quite a bit from it. And, they'll probably, do a lot better as time goes on. But again, it was just kind of weird to me.
And Ben, they had 2 first downs rushing on that last, so Ohio State runs this idiotic jet sweep that gets snuffed out immediately. We get the ball back with minimal 2.5 minutes to play. We start running the ball with Audric Estime, who's he's like a bowling ball made of knives. Right? And so he's just running it up their throat. 2 first downs. And then they're like, well, let's get cute. Let's get fancy. And that, to me, is a learning experience for a young coaching staff, as you said.
Right. Well, I should give you this opportunity to give us your thoughts on this, because I know you and I talked about it when it happened. But Brian Kelly, he leaves. What are your thoughts about the former coach?
So Brian Kelly, there's a lot of folks in the Notre Dame fandom that hate Brian Kelly, and they think the worst of him. But he came as he went. So he left Cincinnati in front of a Sugar Bowl appearance with, I think it was Florida in 2009. And then he left.
Correct.
And he left Notre Dame in front of a Fiesta Bowl appearance. And it's kind of like, well, that's what he does. That's what he does. And in the meantime, between all that, he brought the program up to such a higher stance than it had been before. So you had Tyrone Willingham, Chuck Wise. I mean, just terrible managers of programs. And so he came in and brought the program up to a place that it hadn't been. So I have no ill feelings towards him, and I don't think any Notre Dame fan should.
Yeah, I think you could just say, you got what you would expect to get from.
He came as he went.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what your thoughts are heading into the to the Duke game. Okay. You know, you've got impact players on both sides of the ball. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the defense, because I watched to get ready for today kind of the condensed end of the game.
Right.
And it seemed like, and obviously you got Marvin Harrison Jr. for Ohio State, but it just seems like the receivers were really getting separation, really finding gaps in that defense and gashing them. So tell us who we as Blue Devil fans should look out for on the defensive side of the ball, on the defensive side of the ball, to make a statement.
So first and foremost, it's Benjamin Morrison, number 20. He was a freshman All-American last year. Tremendous player. Really good. And he was on Marvin Harrison most of the night. And when he wasn't, he was on Egbuka, which both of those guys are going to be first round wide receivers.
They look good. Yeah.
They look good, but when he was on them, they didn't score. And they didn't get their usual production against him. He had, I think, 2 passes defended. He almost had an interception. He did really well. He is probably 100% the best player on that defense. Then you have JD Bertrand, who's not as good, but he gets everyone in line. So he's the middle linebacker, the Mike linebacker, and he does a great job of organizing people. He's a 5th-year guy and is fantastic. So he's the one who gets everyone in order. And when we didn't have him in the Central Michigan game, it was clear that was a problem. We don't have any difference makers on the defensive line. We don't. We just don't. There are guys that are trying hard, but there are no difference makers there. So those are the 2 probably biggest members of the defense that I would call out.
Now let's switch to the offensive side of the ball. Other than Sam Hartman, who I think we're all familiar with as Blue Devils fans, who should we be looking out for on offense for the Irish?
Yeah. So Mitchell Evans, tight end, number 88, is fantastic. He just came back from an injury and had, I think, 7 catches last night or the other night. He's really good. The Audric Estime he's a load to bring down. And he brings a lot of energy, kind of like Kyron Williams in the past, who's now playing for the Los Angeles Rams. But Audric Estime is fantastic. So I would say those 2. There's also a couple of other running backs that are really good. Jadarian Price or JD Price is really good. They mix these running backs in and out. And so it's a lot of times it's hard to follow because we don't have names on the back of our jerseys. But Jadarian Price is another one. Jeremiah Love is another one. So those guys are really explosive.
All right. Now you are obviously you have a vested interest in the Irish. Okay.
Correct.
But part of what you got to do is get ready for who's going to be, playing against you. Okay. So you're thinking we're going to Duke. Who are you concerned about? Who are you worried about? Who for the Blue Devils has you concerned?
Well, your quarterback. Your quarterback, because we had Brennan Armstrong, and the goal with him was to contain him, and they did a good job of that. But this quarterback is much better than Brennan Armstrong. I don't know why that is. I don't know why Brennan Armstrong has taken so many steps back, but that guy, Riley, he's a big concern. And I think that's number 1 because he can make throws. you put him in a pressure situation, he can make throws. So I for me, that's the biggest concern, because you give him time, he's gonna do damage to you.
Is there anybody else that you're concerned about on either side of the ball that could cause problems for the Irish? I mean, you mentioned, for example, that you don't feel like you guys have difference makers on the defensive line. Duke has a good line. I mean, we've got depth at that position, all the way down. But it starts with Carter and Franklin. You got Peebles, you got other guys there. I mean, what are you, from a defensive side of things, most concerned about that the Blue Devils might be able to throw at your guys?
Well, there's multiple wide receivers, right? Like, what's his name? Forgetting his name. The main one,
Jalen Calhoun.
So he's a big concern in terms of, and that goes right along with the quarterback, because it's if you let the quarterback get loose and he's just finding someone to throw to, that guy's going to get open. The running backs, I'm not too concerned about the running backs, although, I mean, I think I looked it up. The leading runner has like 191 yards, something like that.
I can't remember because they do kind of a committee system, although Waters has kind of become the guy, but still.
Waters, that's the one.
Yeah. Waters has kind of become the guy, and he's running better than I've seen him. I'm not being critical of him. It just seems like this year he's running better than he has in the past.
Right. Yeah.
But Leonard breaks off long runs, so that eats up a chunk of yardage from the backs, and then the yardage and carries gets distributed. All that gets distributed amongst multiple people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Waters would be the one guy that I would want to keep an eye on. What I would say about our linebacking core is that they're very experienced, but they're not that great. They're not that great. So when you get to the second level against this defense, and again, I don't think we have any difference makers on the defensive line. When you get to the second level against this defense, it's you make a play on one of those linebackers, and Morris Leofau is fine, but he's best at just running his head against a wall. Like he just runs into blocking offensive line. That's what he does best. And then you have Jack Kaiser, who's kind of a little bit of a playmaker, but he's physically limited. So if the Duke running backs get past that first line, that's a concern.
And that'll be interesting to watch, because I talked about this earlier in the year. There were some concerns about how the secondary for Duke was going to fill itself out, but Chandler Rivers is a really good, really good guy to have back there. And we have other pieces in the secondary too. Jeremiah Lewis has come back, Al Blades, and I'm spacing on his name, but the guy who came in from A&M, he has played really well. The linebackers, I don't want to say are still a work in progress, but we haven't had to see the linebackers carry the load on tackling the way that we've had to have for Duke teams in the past, because the D-line's been so good.
Yeah.
And I think, kind of like you, the question mark Duke still has a little bit is in the linebacking core, although Freeman is really coming along.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he could be, that guy for Duke, but we'll see how that plays out going forward. And I think that this will be a good matchup. At least I hope it'll be a good matchup. I mean, it's got all the makings of a game that should be a classic. Now, one thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about is, I was thinking in my head as I was getting ready for this game, and kind of going through in my mind.
Yeah.
what to expect. And kind of the lazy narrative is, oh, Notre Dame's going to be furious. They're going to be fired up. They just, lost a game. They feel like they should have won, and they're going to come out ready to prove things. These guys are borderline professional players, right? The way that college football is currently structured now, I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. The only thing that I'd be curious about is there are times where you see a team lose faith in its coaches and they give up on them.
Yeah.
I am not saying that's what's going on here at Notre Dame. That's something though that could happen where you have two plays right at the end. You don't have enough people on the field. That'll be interesting to watch. But the way that Freeman just kind of said, look, I messed up, man. This is on me. I would kind of think his players would respond favorably to that, don't you?
I think so. I think ultimately the biggest question for me in this game is, can Notre Dame, because like if you go back to the Ohio State game, which I don't want to, but if you go back to it, we had a green out. Everyone's wearing green in the stadium. It's total like pandemonium. You have game day there as well, and everything's going well, and then you lose on just a stupid ass situation. And so the players, to me, I think there is a hangover that is the biggest concern for me, of other than this is a really good Duke football team. And we're not ready for that because you don't associate, as a Notre Dame player, this is a big game. It's Duke, right? Like you don't do that. And that's not a slight against the Duke program. It's just when you come up against them, you're not thinking this is a huge game. And in the meantime, they've lost this heartbreaker of a loss that has all the writings of the coach has failed you on it. And so there is some reckoning that I think has to happen, if it hasn't already, before this game, for that portion of it. But I absolutely think there is a hangover of a big game that could affect Notre Dame. And I wouldn't be surprised if they came out really slowly in this game.
Well, it should be an exciting game, and it should be full of just great moments. I mean, this is a really good matchup, and I'm really excited about it. Now, Dan, one thing that we like to do are predictions because everybody likes to do it. I myself am not a huge fan of them with the score predictions, but people like to do it. So, why don't we start with you? You're the guest. Give us who you think's going to win. Give us and give us a score prediction as well.
Okay, so I do think that Duke will win this game, and I think the way that they win it is they use Leonard and they use his legs. And so I think it's probably going to be 27-24. Duke, Notre Dame.
All right. I am also, in a strange note of positivity, I'm going to take the Blue Devils too. I'm going to take Duke to win 24-20. I think it's going to be a grinded out affair. And part of the reason that I say that is Duke's a little bit off on its deep ball this year. I don't know if that's because Eli Pankel, who seemed to be the over the top guy a lot last year, is out. I think he's going to be out for the season if it hadn't already been made official yet. And so Duke has adjusted to that well. Kevin Johns knows what he's doing, and they've gotten the tight end involved. So they're going for more shorter yardage, intermediate routes. And so that kind of takes some of the time off the clock. And Duke runs I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. It is sort of a hurry up, but it's a slow hurry up. It's not snap the ball in 5 or 6 seconds, right? So I don't think it's going to be a big, shootout, 42, 45, 48 points kind of a thing from each team.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a good one. It's got all the makings of a good game.
Oh, it does.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so we've got two more predictions. One is from a former Duke football player. This is the second time that we've done this. I believe he played guard in the end of the 70s. He was on the roster. His name is Jay Pulaski. You can follow him at Jay Pulaski, Pelosky on Twitter. He messaged me to say that he is taking Duke 21-17. And Jay, thank you a lot for doing that. You follow the account on Twitter. You engage regularly. You retweet, as we used to say, repost now. A lot of what I put out there. You like a lot of the comments. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. But we also have another prediction. And Dan, you're new to the podcast. I don't think you follow regularly, so you may not be familiar with Richlandia. Are you familiar with Richlandia?
I'm not.
Okay. So my dad is the reason I'm a Duke fan. Grew up watching Duke with him, including football with him. Okay. And almost every year, Dad he picks Duke to go 10-2. Okay. One year he picked them to go 10-2, and okay. I can't remember which year it was. And we dubbed the world in which he lives Richlandia. Okay. So I had him come on for the I had him do a little his prediction at the beginning of the season for what he thought Duke was going to do. He said 10-2. He picked Duke to beat Clemson, and it went well. I mean, he was right. Okay, and he has been calling in with his predictions. So every week we do a little check-in Richlandia, see how things are going there. We're going to do that now. We're going to get Dad's prediction. We're going to listen to that now.
Well, hello again, everyone from Richlandia. Glad to be here again. And I just want to say this right off the bat. This is your last chance to get on the 10-2 bus. If you don't get on before the Notre Dame game, it's too late. We're not going to give you credit. I thought about doing a Leonard's Loser tribute this week for those of you who remember those days, but I know how superstitious these sports fans can get, so I'll just start off with a preview like we've been doing. Notre Dame's averaging about 200 yards on the ground and 278 through the air, 10 rushing TDs, 16 passing TDs, scoring about 40 a game, giving up about 15. Their margin of victory has dwindled in the last three games as the competition got stronger. Their leading rusher, Esteem, if I pronounce that correctly, averages just under 100 yards a game. Hartman, as you might expect, 71% completion rate with no picks. The secondary has 5, but no fumble recoveries for the Irish so far. They fumbled 5 times, losing 2. They punt for an average of 48.3. They're 29 of 54 on third down and 3 for 5 on fourth, but they've committed 27 penalties for 250 yards. Hopefully that'll continue against us. Their average time of possession, just over 31 minutes a game. Evans, Thomas, Greathouse, and Tyree have been Hartman's main receiving targets. Their field goal kicker is 3 for 7, but 2 for 4 from a distance of 50 yards or more and a long of 54 yards. Defensively, they have 5 different players with over 20 tackles so far, 19 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, but they've given up 17 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. I think our Blue Devil line, the offensive line, needs to have a really good night, and the secondary needs to do anything they can to minimize the impact of that great Irish tight end. And we know how good Hartman is, but he's quarterbacking in a very different scheme now. And our defense needs another one of those bend but not break nights, and hopefully win a turnover battle again. Our special teams need to continue to be good, and our offense definitely needs to be efficient and eliminate some of the penalties that we've committed. This team has shown they're capable of meeting the challenge presented by good competition, so I'm going to go Blue Devils 28, Irish 24. And Ben, please tell me you got the milk. Let's go Duke.
Okay, that's Richlandia. This is your last chance to get on the 10-2 bus. The bandwagon is leaving right now. Okay. I will say, I think I have steadily gone up with my prediction for the season. 4-0. I'm thinking 9-3 is looking a lot more probable. And I'm telling you, 10-2, it's right in the wheelhouse. I mean, Duke's got it there for the taking. It's a tough, Pitt may have an offense. I'm not really sure.
Doesn't
They
seem
seem to, yeah, they really do seem to be, struggling right now.
bad.
Yeah, it is. It's
Former Notre Dame quarterback Phil Yurkovich is just having a horrible time.
I did not realize he was at Notre Dame.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he hates Notre Dame now.
Why is that? Let's bring us up to speed here. This is
Okay,
interesting.
so he was third on the depth chart and left to go to Boston College,
Should
and
tell you
then
something.
yeah, and Notre Dame played Boston College, and he had some sort of social media post that was like, hey, don't listen to people that are lying to you, that sort of thing. He had a really sort of aggressive subtweet about Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame just blew him out of the water. So, and then he left Boston College and went to Pitt, and so he is Phil. Wish him the best, but I don't think he's a very good quarterback.
You and the defensive backs for West Virginia agree. So I do want to say, I'm excited to see what this Blue Devil team can do.
Yeah.
I just want to go over what their remaining schedule is. They've got Notre Dame. That's not a gimme, obviously. That's going to be a tough game. All right. But NC State, I think what we've seen from NC State, that looks a lot more like a winnable game than it did at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Florida State, I think you still have to favor the Noles in that one. Louisville. So the thing with the Cardinals is I said you probably want to catch them at the beginning of the year as opposed to late in the year. That may have been wrong because Cardinals look really hot right now. I know they've had kind of an easier schedule, but once you start winning games and you believe in yourself, that can carry you a long way. So that could be a tough game, but I would still take Duke in that one. I'm going to take Duke against Wake Forest. I'm going to skip the game against the Chapel Hill Community College. We'll come back to that in a minute. UVA, I mean, you're favoring the Blue Devils, and again, closing out the season against Pitt. I think you have to be favoring the Blue Devils in that one. I mean, look, I know Pat Narduzzi's a good coach and everything, but this does not look to be his year, right?
Well, I would say with all that you all have a great coach, Mike Elko, Notre Dame defensive coordinator for a year before he left for greener pastures with Jimbo Fisher. Mike Elko he's a damn good coach. So the biggest question is, can you keep him? Right?
Yeah, that's going to be the challenging part because I'm sure, let's say, for example, Duke goes 10-2 and plays in the ACC championship game this year. Looking at and again, we're talking about possibilities. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not making a prediction. There's a lot that can happen. We're a third of the way into the season. Anything can happen. All right. But let's just say that were to occur. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to come after it.
Oh yeah.
And he doesn't have the same experience that Cutcliffe did where, he had gotten kind of run out of Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And the rumor was he wanted to stay because Duke showed him loyalty. There's another side to that, which is he couldn't bring all the assistants he wanted to Tennessee, but whatever. Point being, look, everybody is loyal until somebody throws a giant enough sack of cash in front of you.
Right.
Right. And then, like Dwight Schrute, you go where they value loyalty the most. Right. So, and you can't blame them for that. I mean, why would, you can't blame them for that. I do think, and I'll be interested to talk to Steve Weissman about this when we have him on during the bye week. And we get to know the bye week, if you will, to stick with the theme of this season's episode titles. I do think Elko really likes being at Duke. I think he really enjoys Duke. I think he likes the environment. I think he wants to stay there. you always have to wonder how long a coach like him is going to stay at a place like, like Duke University when it comes to football. It's a fair question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, if Duke wins this week, which I just called for them to win because I think there's so much stuff going on in the Notre Dame program. This is a tough team that they're playing. They've got USC, Southern Cal next week. And it's just a for Notre Dame, I just find this to be a loss, right? I think they beat Southern Cal next week, but I think I expect them to lose to Duke. But if Duke beats Notre Dame, you're going to have fans storming the field, and Mike Elko's name is going to be at the top of every coaching search in the nation, and that's going to be what happens, right? Even if he doesn't beat Notre Dame, but they make it a good game, his name is still going to be at the top of every coaching search in the nation.
And not to fire up the Cardinals, but you did just give them motivation because you actually play Louisville after Duke.
Yeah.
Then you've got USC. I do think though that you guys will beat USC because I don't want to be negative and sound like a hater, but let's just go over what they've done defensively. And I think we'll see what happens this week with Colorado for USC.
Yeah.
Colorado is going to be the best offensive team that they will have played so far, but they gave up 28 to San Jose State, 14 to Nevada, 10 to Stanford, 28 to Arizona State.
Arizona State, yeah.
They're going to give up points to Colorado because it's the Big 12, and by law, I'm sorry, that hasn't happened yet. But anyway,
but they're obligated still, I think. Yeah.
Right. A soon to be Big 12 or Super 16, as I like to call it, team. They have to score a lot of points. So I think, offensively, you guys will give USC probably more than Lincoln Riley is capable of handling
on the defense, and Alex Grinch on their defensive coordinator. Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably right, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. And thank you for reminding me of Louisville, which I'd forgotten about. But Louisville they're 4-0, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
you're giving them motivation, man.
They're not listening to me, but the Louisville, I don't know much about them at all, frankly. Is it Scott Satterfield? Is that who's there?
No, Sat went to Cincinnati, and now it's Jeff Brom is back.
Yeah.
And they played a tough game to open the season against Georgia Tech, which Georgia Tech is not a team that I would want to play because I think that they're being coached very, very well by Brent Key. They're 2-2.
Oh yeah.
But they beat Murray State handily. They beat Indiana by a touchdown. They put up 56 against Boston College. This game against NC State should be a good one. I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to it to see what those two are capable of.
Yeah, but NC State was not like their defense is a real defense, but their offense was not all that impressive to me.
Yeah, they've got a receiver. I think it's Concepcion, maybe. I can't remember his name, but he's good. But he's young. Past that, the receiving core does not look good, and Brennan Armstrong does not look particularly comfortable.
He looks like, to me, a shell of his former self, and that's just from the Notre Dame game with NC State. He does not look comfortable. He doesn't look like he's wheeling and dealing like he did. And they used him like a must rush. So like not Notre Dame used, which I expect they'll do against Leonard as well, to try and just collapse the pocket and not necessarily get a sack, but make him beat them with his arm, and he couldn't do it. But Riley Leonard is a better player right now than Brendan Armstrong.
I think that that's probably fair, and I think that Riley Leonard is playing the way that NC State would want. Well, I'm trying to think of a way that's maybe a little more fair. The offense that Duke has put together is what NC State was hoping for.
Yeah, that's right.
It just hasn't really worked out.
It hasn't. No. Yeah.
So, all right. So you've got one of the things I wanted to ask you about. We went a little bit out of order. We talked about Louisville. We talked about USC. Other than that, you guys have Pittsburgh, Clemson, Wake Forest, and Stanford. Of the remaining games that we have that the Irish have on the schedule, which game are you looking forward to most, aside from this coming matchup with the Blue Devils?
Well, it's got to be Clemson, just because of the fact that they have the most star power. I mean, even though they're down, and this is a down year, they've recruited to the point where they have more talent, I think, on their team than Notre Dame does. And so that's, for me, that's the biggest game other than the USC game. I mean, every Notre Dame fan had 3 games circled on their schedule this year. And that was USC, Clemson, and Ohio State. And so we've lost the first one. And now it's like, oh, we get to go into Duke and face like a really better team than we thought on the heels of a horrible loss. That's like a mind-bending loss, right? Like, it's like, why would you do that? How could you put your players on the field like that? How could you do that? And now it's like, hey, here's a really good team. Game day's here. They're ready to play. And it's like, oh man. But those 3 teams, other than that, I mean, Duke was always a concern. But now it's, for me, it's like a red flag, big red flag. With the situation, the way that last game went down, and game day is going to be there, it just, the energy level, they have to bring like maximum energy, and I don't know how they do that.
Well, let's hope that they don't, as a Blue Devil fan, and Duke coasts to victory in a top 10 ranking, because God, that would be sweet. Now, Dan, you have answered a lot of questions. You were kind enough to come on here. You and I have known each other for a long time.
Yep.
We tried a case together. We lost that case. That's right. It was 2 cases. That's right. Well, I think we lost both of them, and they were both. They were not good cases. They were not. Yeah. The shoulder case, and then that's right. The gentleman who broke his hip in the hospital bed. That's right. You were there for that. Right. I remembered the other one. You can see how I've excised that case from my head. Those were cases that were handed to me, and then you had to suffer along with me. And I appreciated, though, you coming to try those cases with me. So we've known each other for a long time, and you always have something good to say. And you may not know this, because I'm sure that listening to a Duke football podcast is not at the top of your to-do list, but I give every guest a chance to say whatever's on their mind. We give them an open mic. So I'm gonna give you the floor now. It's yours. Go ahead, and anything else you want to talk about.
Cool. Well, I would just say that Duke seems like it's a great program on the rise, and I hope we murdered you all in the game.
All right. Well, I sort of regret giving you the open mic. No, I'm just kidding. That's paying me back for saying, no, why don't we have Dan come try these dog cases with me? You know?
Yep.
I did, though. And nobody really is going to care about this, but it's my podcast, so I'll say what I want to say. After those trials, there was, when we were at the same firm, there was a very legendary attorney there. His name is SD Roberts Moore. He went by Rabbit, and Rabbit, everything about Rabbit is unique and will forever be unique. There will never be another Rabbit. And I
No.
told Rabbit what happened at the trial, and he said, and I'm not going to do the Rabbit voice on the podcast because it's not going to come out well. But Rabbit has a unique way of speaking, and his voice is unique. And he says, "Well, how did Dan do? What did you think about Dan?" And I said, well, then I still called him Mr. Moore. I said, "Well, Mr. Moore, I think Dan did great. I think Dan is going to be a really good trial lawyer, and I think we should get him in our section in the plaintiffs group. And I think we should steal Dan and have him come work for us." And I think Rabbit tried to do that. It was not successful. You probably wisely resisted the group. We got good results. We were rather dysfunctional. I guess for people who are like this, who are sports fans who listen to this, I think it'd be fair to say we were kind of like an Urban Meyer style practice group.
Oh yeah.
We had a lot of success.
Some red flags.
But yeah, there were some red flags. There were some burnout. There were people, leaving our practice group left and right. I don't think anybody was, groping much younger women in a bar that I'm aware of. I don't think we did anything quite that crazy, but it was
I've heard of that. Yeah.
It was rather dysfunctional at times. And I think most like management consultant people would go, "How is this working? How are you making this work?" But it did.
The flying rock. And, you and I have worked together since then, and I've always appreciated you. I didn't like you much when you were the lawyer in charge of me, but we've worked together since then several times, and I always have appreciated your professionalism, and you've done great. Great.
Well, thank you, Dan. And I've sent a lot of clients your way, and I know you've always done a great job. And I'm glad that you got over my initial frostiness, if you would.
I think probably you were just like, "Who is this dipshit guy that I have to babysit?"
No. That was not it at all. What it was really was, there were a lot of cases that we had that should have been turned down and not pursued and gone forward. And you know how it is. You've got 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
You always have a young child at the Sullivan house, right?
Right.
When you have a young kid, if you're not spending time at home with your kid or doing family stuff, you would rather be working on a case that at least you feel invested in.
Yeah.
And both those cases you and I had to go try were terrible cases.
They were bad.
They were bad. They were awful.
They were very bad.
And I've never been the kind of guy who can just take that kind of whatever I'm feeling about it and just press it down and act like it's not there, So I think what you were probably sensing come off was not, "I'm mad at Dan," or, I've got some issue with Dan. It was more like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we here? Like, what is the point? I mean, what is this case about? I mean, and we're sitting there, and in one of our cases, I liked our client, but he was not a great communicator. He could not really explain what he went through. And when you know this, when you have clients who may not be able to tell their story, unless they've got somebody who can come in and tell it for them, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah. You got a problem. Yeah.
And so I think that was when I first realized that. And when I try cases now, I tell clients all the time, I said, "Look, I can't tell your story, man. I can't testify for you. You got to tell it.
Yeah.
It's on you. You got to do it." Yeah. So I think that's kind of what you were experiencing. Plus, and we don't need to get into this on the podcast, but there were a couple of people there that both you and I encountered.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we don't need to bring that up, but I think that probably had more to do with it.
We're grateful for our experience there, right?
Oh, let me tell you, I tell people all the time, I would go work at that firm again, even though it was crazy, even though it was, weird at times. For example, you and I probably should not have been sent to try those cases by ourselves. As young as we were, as relatively inexperienced as we were, we probably should not have been.
You seem like you knew what you were doing. I definitely did not. But
But my point is, we got that experience, right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
Like we go out, we pick a jury, we see what happens. We got great experience from it, and I think it worked out well for us in the long run. I mean,
It did.
you're running your own firm now. I'm running my own firm now. We both have respective law partners that co-manage the firm with us, and it's working out great. So
It is. So let me
yeah.
ask you, what is the number one player for Duke, other than the quarterback, Riley Leonard, that is the most dangerous for Notre Dame, in your opinion, in this game? Because that's something I really want to know. Is it Waters? Is it River?
So defense, it's a lot harder to kind of put it down to one guy.
Of course.
The way that secondary is coming together, I think Chandler Rivers does elevate it a lot, but it's not like he's got slouches next to him.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a good secondary there. But I think what you really want to look out for, okay, is you're going to want to find a way to scheme and take Jordan Moore out of the game plan. You want to shut Jordan Moore down. He is fast. He is, this is kind of a lazy analysis. He's like I was going to say he's athletic, but I mean, who isn't that's playing college football at that level? He's kind of a freak. I mean, he is, he was going to be a quarterback. They transitioned him to wide receiver.
Yeah.
He's really, really good. Right. And he can really make that offense go. He can go on those underneath routes. He can come across the middle. You can, get creative with screens with him. You can do a lot with him. And he adds a versatility to that offense.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm Notre Dame, I'm going to try to take him out and not take him out the way that the Colorado State player did to the guy from Colorado, but take him out of the game. Right. Make Duke go elsewhere.
Neutralize.
Force. That's the word. Force them to find other guys to beat you. Now, if you can do that, you're going to be worried about Calhoun. Obviously, he's going to get a lot of attention. But then you're going to start looking at Nicky Dalmolin at tight end, and then what the running backs can do and how you're going to contain Leonard. Because if you're trying to come down and contain Leonard, that's going to open up the tight end, and it's going to open up more.
Yeah.
To get catches.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting because I think what they're going to try to do, and I don't have a phone line into the coaching staff, but I think they're going to try to do the same thing they did to NC State with Brennan Armstrong, which is mush rush. Don't try to sack him. Just collapse the pocket against him and make him beat you with his arm. I think that's what they're probably going to do because they've been doing that and it's been successful. So I think that's what they're going to try to do against Leonard. And that'll be interesting with those playmakers. If he can get outside of that, or if he can step up and make downfield throws, that's going to be a long game.
Well, we'll see what happens on Saturday. Dan, thank you for coming on. You've been an excellent guest. We appreciate your time. Should be an exciting one. Follow us at our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Give us a call at 540-632-0160. Hit us up on Twitter. You know where to find us. And as always, go Duke.
Go Irish.